Atomic Heart 2 doesn't just look like a sequel, it looks like Mundfish's new project that could drag the entire world into chaos. The borders of Facility 3826 have now been crossed. That strange, disturbing, and at the same time incredibly stylized world that threw us into a Soviet retro-futuristic nightmare in the first game is now turning into a much bigger crisis. Robots, artificial intelligence, experiments, political secrets, P3's past, and the CHAR-les threat are no longer the problem of a single facility. Atomic Heart 2 is preparing to expand this universe on a global scale, and today we're going to talk in detail about everything we know, from its release date and story to its combat system and open-world structure. Atomic Heart 2 currently does not have an official release date. Its Steam page still says to be announced, which means Mundfish has not announced a clear day, month, or year yet. So you should not fully trust claims online saying things like, "It is definitely coming in 2026. The statements from the developer side are more cautious. Mundfish CEO Robert Bagratuni previously said the game is still a few years away from release. That shows us that the most realistic estimate is 2027 or later. The important thing here is this. Atomic Heart 2 is not just an empty project that was announced by name. The game was officially shown at Summer Game Fest 2025, and with the trailer, it became clear how much Mundfish wants to expand this sequel. What we saw in the trailer does not feel like a slightly expanded version of the first game. It feels like a more cinematic, faster, larger scale, and much more expensive-looking sequel. The first Atomic Heart kept us inside and around the massive science complex called Facility 3826. That area was very strong in terms of atmosphere, but sometimes the world felt bigger than it actually was, without giving the player that much freedom. Atomic Heart 2 breaks that boundary. In official statements, it has been said that the game will offer a living world, that events will now unfold on a global scale, and that players will be given more freedom. Atomic Heart 2 no longer looks like it will just be a weird FPS where we shoot robots. Mundfish is expanding this game with more RPG elements. In other words, they seem to be aiming for a bigger role-playing adventure, where you upgrade your character, customize your weapons in a deeper way, and choose your abilities based on your own playstyle. The action foundation of the first game is being preserved, but more choices, more progression, and more freedom are being added on top of it. The story will directly continue from the first game and its DLCs. This is very important because Atomic Heart 2 is not being presented as a standalone adventure starting from scratch. The collective crisis from the first game, Sechenov's plans, P3's mental breakdowns, the CHAR-les threat, and the doors opened in the DLCs will form the foundation of this game. Especially the final DLC, Blood on Crystal, feels like the point where the first game's story closes and a new era begins. P3, also known as Major Sergei Nikhaev, seems likely to remain at the center of this story, but whether he will still be the same man is a big question. After everything he experienced at the end of the first game and during the DLC events, it is hard to imagine P3 staying in the same mental and political position. If we also consider the detail in the trailer where he is addressed with a different status, his position may have changed. Maybe he is no longer the system's soldier, but the system's biggest problem. In my opinion, the CHAR-les issue is the darkest point of Atomic Heart 2. In the first game, this artificial intelligence threat had already turned everything upside down, but in the second game, the events could move beyond a small laboratory conspiracy and turn into a much bigger disaster. If the collective system is no longer limited to Facility 3826, then the area a being like CHAR-les could control becomes much more terrifying. This could move the story beyond personal revenge and into a global artificial intelligence nightmare. If you paid attention in the trailer, the ballerina twins appear again, and this time their designs look much more flashy. That gold armor-like appearance does not feel like just visual decoration. Mundfish already turned these characters into icons in the first game, but in the sequel, they may move them into a more central role. Whether they will be on P3's side or appear again with a more complicated role is not clear right now, but the trailer clearly tells us these twins are returning, and this time they may be more important. There is a very interesting change in the atmosphere of the trailer. The science facility, forested areas, and Soviet experiment center feeling of the first game seem to be replaced here by larger city visuals, darker underground connections, and a wider system collapse. Atomic Heart 2 looks like it will show us not only a robot uprising, but also the backstreets of this world, its black market, its political dirt, and a society corrupted by technology. The new combat system now turns both of your hands into deadly weapons. This is one of the most exciting innovations Mundfish has talked about. In the first game, the polymer glove abilities were already one of the most fun parts of combat, but in the sequel, this system will merge with weapons in a more fluid way. While controlling an enemy with one hand, you will be able to tear them apart with the other. I think if this system works properly, it could change the fate of the game. Do you think the two-hand combat system will make Atomic Heart 2 much more fun than the first game? Don't forget to write it in the comments while also liking the video. This system is not being added just to look cooler. In the first game, the combat sometimes had great ideas, but it could also feel a little messy. There was melee combat, weapons, and glove abilities all at the same time, but they did not always flow perfectly together. Atomic Heart 2 sets a clearer goal here, to give the player a faster, more creative, and more controlled battlefield. If they manage to do that, every encounter could feel like a small experiment zone. The weapon and ability progression side also looks like it will be deeper. This time, we may not simply move forward with the logic of, I got a stronger weapon, so I deal more damage. Different build options, different skill paths, and different playstyles may stand out more. Someone who focuses on melee combat and someone who invests heavily in polymer glove abilities could complete the same section in completely different ways. This is where the RPG side of Atomic Heart 2 will truly gain value. The world design will be much more open compared to the first game, but we should not misunderstand this. Atomic Heart 2 will probably not be a massive open-world game in the classic sense, where every corner is filled with icons. At least that is not what the current statements suggest. A more accurate definition would be this: a larger, more connected structure with more areas to explore, while still maintaining a strong story path. I think this is a much better choice for Atomic Heart. The biggest problem with the world design in the first game was this: the map looked very interesting, but sometimes it did not really make the player feel like they were exploring. Atomic Heart 2 is trying to fix that criticism. We can expect more side activities, more accessible areas, more movement within cities, and more vertical spaces. If Mundfish makes this world truly full, instead of just making it larger and empty, the sequel could fix one of the first game's biggest weaknesses. Even the vehicles we saw in the trailer show that the scale of the game has changed. A glider-like flying vehicle, parachute, surfboard, grapple hook, and a strange mount that can transform from a robot into a vehicle all stand out. These details tell us this: in Atomic Heart 2, not only is the map getting bigger, but the way we move through it is also changing. The clunky vehicles of the first game may be replaced by faster, more acrobatic, and more creative traversal systems. The city is, in my opinion, one of the most interesting parts of the game. The central metropolis we saw in the trailer does not feel like just a beautiful background view. According to developer statements, this city will be an important part of the gameplay loop. In other words, missions, characters, hidden areas, side stories, and maybe even the game's biggest conflicts could be shaped through this metropolis. This city is very important if Atomic Heart 2 wants to truly create the feeling of a living world. Enemy variety also seems to be expanding. The robots and mutants in the first game were already very creative, but in the Atomic Heart 2 trailer, we see much larger creatures, massive mechanical threats, and set-piece focused boss moments. Especially the huge, Attack on Titan-style walking figure shows that Mundfish will use a much more aggressive sense of scale this time. So we will not just be tearing apart robots in corridors, we may see much larger and more cinematic conflicts. On the technical side, the game is being developed with Unreal Engine 5. This could expand Atomic Heart's already strong art direction with more detailed lighting, denser environments, and more cinematic scenes. The first game was visually memorable because it did not just have good graphics. It had a very clear style. That is also Atomic Heart 2's advantage. If technical quality and art direction come together properly, this game could become one of the most visually distinct FPS RPGs of the new generation. The use of Queen's Don't Stop Me Now in the trailer may have felt tonally different to some players, because Atomic Heart's identity was built on a more Soviet, retro-futuristic, weird, and disturbing atmosphere. But I do not see this as moving away from the identity of the series. I think Mundfish is more likely trying to say, this universe is no longer the story of just one country, one facility, or one event. If Atomic Heart 2 is going global, its tone may also expand a little. On the platform side, the clearest information right now is that the game is planned for PC and consoles. The Steam page is active, so the PC version is clearly listed. As for consoles, full details have not been announced yet. Considering Unreal Engine 5, the game's growing scale, and its visual goals, PS5 and Xbox Series X, S seem like the main platforms. As for whether it will release on older generation consoles, it would not be right to speak definitively without an official statement. The cube detail makes Atomic Heart 2 even more interesting. Mundfish also announced a project called The Cube, an MMORPG shooter set in the same universe. This means Atomic Heart is no longer just a single game series. It is turning into a larger universe. When you look at the first game, the DLCs, The Cube, and Atomic Heart 2 together, it is very clear that Mundfish wants to build a long-term atomic universe. This could make the second game not just a sequel, but the major breaking point at the center of the universe. When I look at the whole picture, the biggest advantage and the biggest risk of Atomic Heart 2 are the same thing. It is playing very big. A more open world, more RPG systems, a bigger story, more characters, improved combat, more cinematic boss fights, and other projects set in the same universe. All of this sounds incredible, but Mundfish needs to bring all of it together in a balanced way. The first game had a very strong atmosphere, but its pacing and open-world structure were not always perfect. If Atomic Heart 2 is going to succeed, it has to be not just bigger, but smarter in its design. Right now, Atomic Heart 2 is one of the FPS RPG projects I am most curious about for 2027 and beyond. The release date is still unclear, but its direction is very clear. A bigger world, a darker story, a deeper RPG system, more flexible combat, returning characters, and a much larger atomic universe. Do you think Mundfish can truly surpass the first game this time, or does Atomic Heart 2 look too ambitious? Write your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to support the channel. I'll see you in the next video with new gaming news, rumors, and detailed updates.